Arrived, The New Woman's Party by Donald Wilhelm. From the Green Book Magazine, Volume 23, 1920. The story of a militant Quakeress and the other interesting women who are winning their fight. Why has thee been arrested, Alice? Why has thee been sent to jail for 7 months? The answer is, of course, the National Woman's Party. But how and what the militant Quakeress, the modern Susan B. Anthony, answered the little Quaker mother in Moorestown, New Jersey, we do not know. We know only that she wrote in friendly spirit, with its thee and thou and thine, and we may conjecture that, in friendly phrase, she wrote what she had wired a Southern State chairman of her party, who was very, very, very discouraged. We can, we shall, make them see it, because it is so right. And she, this girl body of a woman, did gloriously, what with jail sentences for herself and nearly 300 other really valorous women, make them see it, the whole gusty crew of 'em, including, perhaps, you and me, see it, the light and justice in the ascendancy of women, from the political plight of vegetables to the majesty of citizenship and the vote. To do that, Alice Paul established the first women's party in all history, a party unique, quite, in that it had and has a platform that it stands on, sleeps on, argues on, prays on, fights on. A platform with only one plank, a straight and narrow one, the enfranchisement of women by federal action. It put up no candidates. On that one straight and narrow plank there was no room. Indeed, that plank was so imperiously rigorous that, for want of room, many a man walked it to political oblivion. But it was a wieldy and right merrily manipulated plank withal, considering that slivers from it blinded many a bad man's eye, considering that it was employed even, though the figure hurts a little, to chastise the President. But first, lest we quite misjudge the physical prowess of this militant Quakeress, she who was jostled and jerked and jailed, starved and generally bedeviled by the blue coated minions of old John Prejudice, the arbiter of creation, let it be said that she had no love for 6 years of Prejudice and his processes, albeit she is a doctor of philosophy, a Ph.D., if you will. She hated such war, especially at the White House gates, but she was not a whit too proud to fight for the same grand old cause we were fighting for in Europe, certain inalienable rights, etc., etc. She, her shock troops, and wanting such masterly strategy as we shall explain further on, defeated the President and two great political parties, not because they wanted to, but necessarily because, as she told me, political parties give just what they have to give, act and they act, pause, they relax. To show you, the President finally said he was for suffrage. Then he relaxed. We said that wasn't enough. Then he went to Congress and addressed the Senate. We told him that wasn't enough. He began to write to voters to send back men in favor of suffrage. But that wasn't enough, for we knew he could, if he would, do vastly more. He began to cable them from abroad, so we met him at the pier in Boston. But that was by no means all of the strategy employed, as we shall see, in the rule laid down by the militant Quakeress that no party should enjoy peace, lest it call all women sister. So let us put our binoculars on her, and, if we quite properly can get her into focus, look at her and her motives over, across, and through. Behold, then, no haggard fury with disheveled hair. To the contrary, a rather small feminine figure in her young thirties, a girl woman of an adaptive, physically fine drawn type, who is quiet, modest, reticent, whom we find sitting in a large room all white and purple and gold, the tints of the tricolor, resting easily and interestingly in a large purple chair, a trim and alert girlish figure in white, with a purple scarf mantling her slight shoulders. She is, clearly, of mental and spiritual rather than of physical strength. And if you are a wise old owl, you see a lot to interest you in her rather triangular face, in the wide, smooth, frank, and fearless brow. the sensitive, sturdy nose and pointed chin, in the eyes that you are pleasurably surprised to find are nearer blue than gray, in their meditative and questioning scrutiny. Well, you conclude, she is interesting, isn't she? But why, oh why, did she do it? Why, oh why? Why? She would repeat, with a lurking and quizzical sense of mischief and amusement. Why? Because it had to be done. Aha! Opportunist, you tell your other self. But again, quite to the contrary. Quakeress, to be sure, and Quakers are not all prayerful. Moreover, the Quakers are raised to believe in sex equality. Susan B. Anthony was one, and Alice Paul did much to finish what she began. Miss Paul was sent to a private school early. Then she went to Swarthmore College, confident that coeducation need not be the thief of time, and was graduated in 1905, aged 20. The next year she spent at the college settlement in New York City, a settlement worker and a student at the School of Philanthropy. The year following, 1907, she got her master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania. In 1907 to 1908 she studied and worked in the Woodbrook School of Social Work in Birmingham, England, and applied herself vigorously to the study of sociology and economics at the University of Birmingham. The year 1908 to 1909 she gave to a postgraduate work in the School of Economics of the University of London. While carrying on her college studies she worked for one winter at the Summerlank settlement in Birmingham and assisted the Charity Organization Society. In London for half a year she was assistant secretary of one of the districts of the London Charity Organization Society. Another half year she gave to the Peel Institute for Social Work, in the tenement house district of London. Another summer she lived and worked in the Hoxton Street settlement, and for another period in the Canning Town settlement. Then she returned to America to do more charity organization to America, drafted the suffrage amendment in New York City, and to take her doctor's degree at the University of Pennsylvania. All through these years, especially in England, she was gradually coming to realize that the interests of womankind were her preeminent interests. It was no wonder, therefore, that she proceeded to lend her help to the National American Woman Suffrage Association, which for years, faithfully and steadily, had been working to achieve, in the separate states, legislation to afford women enfranchisement. She was made chairman of its legislative committee, sent to Washington, soon to gleam there as no uncertain light. We must get the picture, the year 1913 rolling round, and this girl, aged 28, almost unknown, hiring a room in Washington, to go therefrom to conquer a nation, and soon to lose the support even of the conservative organization that had sent her. When we came here in 1913, she explained, when at last I got to her and induced her to tell me the story, Congress had simply not heard of suffrage as a national issue. Suffrage had not been reported out of committee or been talked about in either the House or Senate for over 20 years. It had never been voted on. Neither president nor the great political parties ever mentioned suffrage. Clearly, if we kept on this way, we young women would be old women before enfranchisement would come. If, on the other hand, we turned to the federal amendment, instead of awaiting action by the states, to concentrate the forces of suffrage on Congress and the president, probably we could force action. The National Woman's Party, it was the Congressional Union then, was short of funds. In the campaign of 1916, for instance, it had only $5,000 to spend in a campaign against two great parties, but specifically against the Democratic Party, which had, of course, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and traditions, personnel, organizations down to the last state and the last precinct in that state. It was short, too, of workers, but women and some men came forward, some to make great personal sacrifices to follow the leadership of this girl, the youngest political leader, by the way, and one of the very ablest in our national life. Her good judgment and that of her associates determined them to accept facts as they found them. It was recognized that ours is a party government. So, when the congressional elections came in the autumn of 1914, and the suffrage amendment was still disregarded in Washington, despite its shortage of personnel and of funds, the Woman's Party instituted a campaign of attack in suffrage states on the party in power, the Democratic Party, and appeal was made to women voters there to vote for the defeat of the party, the Democratic Party, which, while in power, that is, in control of the committees and of the caucus that controlled committees in Congress, had used its power and position to obstruct the enfranchisement of all women. The hard logic of party government was applied, in other words, by the Woman's Party. It served notice to this effect on the Democratic Party, from the President down, and to all its candidates. Cooperate, put the suffrage amendment through, or we'll rally all our strength against you all along the line, no matter what, individually, you say or do. In 1915, the appeal to the women voters in states that had suffrage was carried further. The first national convention of women voters was the result, in San Francisco, during the Panama Pacific Exposition. From this convention envoys were sent across the country to Washington to present to the President and Congress the demand for national enfranchisement of women. Immediately thereafter the President announced his conversion to the principles of equal suffrage by the state method, but not by the national method, which was not enough. Consequently, in the following spring, in Chicago, another great convention of voting women was held. In that convention, women organized to fight President Wilson and all Democratic candidates for office, just as long as the President and his party opposed the suffrage amendment. As a result of this convention, or at least as a result of the determination that the women displayed, suffrage planks were spiked down, for the first time in our history, in the national presidential platforms of all the political parties, for the campaign of 1916. But when the administration and Congress settled down to work after the November elections, suffrage still had no place on the legislative program, and President Wilson explained that fact by explaining that he was the servant of the party whose platform he was known to have dictated, and that he could not exceed the state suffrage plank in that platform which he himself was acknowledged to have written. It was then that the shock troops of Miss Paul debauched on the White House, as well as on Congress, once more, and there, through cold and stormy weather, despite arrest and imprisonment, despite ridicule and every shaft and weapon that could be summoned against them, they stayed substantially all the time till the amendment was passed. But it would be entirely superficial to suppose that Miss Paul trusted wholly to such a frontal attack. Not at all, successful though that was. She delegated to Miss Maud Younger and her corps of lobbyists the task of completing and perfecting a card index, a kind of rogues gallery, in which were recorded the results of all manner of searching inquiry about and interviews with the President, the two ex-presidents, every member of Congress and the Senate, and about everyone else who, coming or going, might have had or might have any relation to suffrage. As far as anyone knows, this was the first achievement of its scope and kind ever carried out. It was like G2, General Pershing's vast intelligence system at General Head, Amved something quarters. Closely related was the Political Committee, with Mrs. Abby Scott Baker as chairman, to which was entrusted the winning over by personal interviews of all manner of groups or collections of men or women who were known to have influence with senators or representatives, especially those senators or representatives who were listed as doubtful or black in the rogues gallery presided over by Miss Younger. And closely related likewise was the Organization and Legislative Committee, headed by Miss Doris Stevens, which extended its functions, and is still extending them, out from Washington to the state organizations and down through them to the people, or constituents, in the members' home states. It was very, very simple. Great cooperations have been laying down organization lines like these for years, with a central administrative bureau with its president or chairman of the board of directors, its subsidiaries each charged with certain functions. And it was and is very powerful. But suppose we let the militant Quakeress tell how it works in the case of a real live senator. There is the case of Senator Blank. Now we call Miss Younger's card index organization our thermometer. She gathers the information and finds out how the men stand. Also, she deals directly through the lobby with the senators and representatives here in Washington. She reported that there was no hope of getting Senator Blank by direct action. So the political committee was notified, and Mrs. Baker saw everyone who, she thought, could bring any influence to bear, information therefore being supplied largely by Miss Younger. To make a long and detailed story shorter, at about the same time the legislative committee under Miss Stevens got to work. Then Miss Stevens went to the senator's state, and in a trice, to right of him, to left of him, down the line in front of him, and in fact under him, Senator Blank, the suffragists were at work. He submitted. And modest Miss Paul naively remarks, "I do not mean to claim that what we did led him to change." So you ask Miss Paul, in behalf of this legislator, if it isn't unfair for women thus to take advantage of a man. How else, she asks simply, can women make their wants known when they haven't the vote? Then she adds, while you ponder, we think it is the duty of a congressman or a state legislator to represent the people in his vote instead of his own personal opinion. By organization we seek first to organize opinion and crystallize it and then to bring it to bear. This, by the way, is what all manner of organizations do, though none of it do it better than that of the militant Quakeress. End of Arrived, the New Women's Party by Donald Wilhelm.